In this video, we're going to be solving with the quadratic formula. In case you were unaware, the quadratic formula is if we have ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, then the value of x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of the quantity b squared minus 4ac, square root of all of that, divided by 2 times a. And this right here, this little bit, that's our discriminant. So that tells us about the number of roots and any imaginary solutions that come from underneath the square root. Let's take a look at this problem 1 right here. A is going to be equal to 1, B is 5, and C is 3. So we'd have that x is equal to negative 5 plus or minus the square root of, see here, 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3, square root of all of that, divided by 2 times 1. I like to write my quadratic formula out exactly every single time before I start making any simplifications, because I'm looking for it to be consistent and I'm looking for it to not have any errors, and I just make less mistakes that way. Now I've gone ahead and I've simplified this a little bit so that we've got negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 13, because that's 5 squared minus 4 times 3, 13 divided by 2. We can't do anything with that, so we're just going to leave it as is. We're going to move on to our next problem. The square root of a prime number, I'm sorry, but that's as good as we can do with it. And in our next problem, number 2 here, we've got x squared minus 2x plus 17 is equal to 0. In this case, a is once again 1, b is going to be a negative 2, and c is a positive 17. Let's see what the quadratic formula gives us this time. So that's a negative, negative 2. This is why I like to write everything out in full, is those negative signs. And then a negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 17. I'm fond of using parentheses for my multiplication. All of that's divided by 2 times 1. In both of these, a was 1, but if a is not 1, then writing it out in the times a format every time, even if it's 1, you avoid making that mistake of just writing 1 or just dividing by 2 automatically. That's a pretty common mistake, so I like to write out 2 times 1 each time. Okay, back to simplifying. A negative, negative 2, that's a positive 2, plus or minus the square root of, let's see here, 4 minus, oh goodness, 4 times 17, 68, yeah? Looks like we're going to have some negative in the square root, so we're going to have an imaginary solution here. So let's see here, this is 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 64. That's divided by 2. 64 is, of course, the square root of 8, so this is 2 plus or minus 8i, right? We're going to take that negative, and this becomes an I, and then the 64, that becomes 8. So we once again have 2 plus or minus 8i divided by 2, and we can divide both of these. 2 divided by 2, we can divide 8 by 2, so we'll get 1 plus or minus 4i, and that's going to be equal to x. That's our solution, and that's solving these with the quadratic formula. Just be certain that you've got it in standard form before you apply the quadratic formula. Great. See you next video.